Amen. So keep your place there in Genesis chapter number 30. We're going to look at the story at the end of that chapter in just a few minutes. So tonight we're continuing the creation series, and this evening I am going to talk about the subject of evolution, which is the antithesis to the creation story, really, when it comes to what is taught today. And more specifically, I'm going to talk to you tonight about three major mistakes or major errors of the theory of evolution. All right, and we're going to look at that in just a few minutes, and we'll look at this story. So keep your place in Genesis 30, even if I turn you away from there. But evolution has obviously many more than just three mistakes. So I'm going to give you three mistakes, major mistakes in the theory of evolution. And then also I'm going to give you a bunch of bonus ones at the end. But a lot of the ones that you have, that you probably thought about fall underneath these three umbrellas that we're going to talk about tonight. All right, so first of all, let's get into number one. The first one is, and I'm sure most of you have heard this before, is that, you've heard the point number one is going to be that we are closely correlated to animals, right? Especially chimpanzees. How many of you have heard that human DNA is 98% or higher the same or identical to that of a chimpanzee or of, some kind of primate? I mean, most of us have heard that before, right? So the first mistake with evolution that I want to talk about tonight is that correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation, all right? Humans and chimpanzees may share 98.8% of DNA, meaning the same. What is DNA? DNA is basically the genetic code that makes up all living organisms. It's kind of a genetic blueprint, right? So it's beyond the cellular level, and it basically, your DNA tells you everything. It tells your cells what to do, how tall you're going to be, what you're going to look like, how strong or weak you will be. But evolutionary biologists over and over will tell us that, well, because we are 98 or 99%, our DNA is that close to primates, we clearly came from, monkeys or, the primate class, all right? But I went and I did some extrapolation. I'm going to talk a lot about extrapolation tonight, but I did some extrapolation to see if this percent of DNA being related to humans is something that it is a good correlate that we should look at as far as causation of where we came from, right? So I figured I would graph this, right? What's it, if we're 98% chimpanzee, what are we 50%? What are we 40%? So I kind of made a little graph and I looked up some things. So 98% of the DNA that humans have is, the same as chimpanzee DNA, but how about this? 85%, we have 85% of our DNA in common with horses, all right? So all of a sudden it's starting to fall apart a little bit. We have 70% of our DNA correlates to blowfish, all right? So 70% of our DNA correlates to blowfish. So really what I'm trying to get you to see here, and if I just keep going down, 70% of our DNA correlates with earthworms, all right? 50% of our DNA correlates with mushrooms. 25% of our DNA correlates with radishes. And then 10% of our DNA correlates with bacteria, all right? So point is, we're 70% blowfish according to evolutionary biology today, right? Now, how many of you have seen the illustration in all the life science books that they teach in school of the monkey, and then he kind of slowly turns into a man? It's kind of the monkey that's like this, and then he turns into this guy, and it's 10 pictures. How many of you have seen that before, right? But guess what? Really what it should be, if we're looking at the DNA correlates, it should be a bacteria, and then a radish, and then a cabbage, and then what else did I say? A mushroom, and then an earthworm, and then a blowfish, and then a horse, and then a chimpanzee, right? But no, that wouldn't be as convincing, right? But here's the thing, with drawings and illustrations like that, and you're going to kind of see that as a pattern that we talk about tonight. That's fake. Somebody made that up. It's not real. Someone just drew that picture of that, that monkey turning into a man. All right, so the first point is correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation. I mean, meaning just because things even look similar under a microscope, it does not mean that they came from one another. All right, so look, I mean, what we try to do, with what we try to do with extrapolation is we try to look at things that have happened and we try to predict what's going to happen in the future. It doesn't work so well going the other way. I gave a couple years ago when I was talking about Richard Dawkins, but I gave some examples of how, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation in all cases. How many of you remember that sermon where I talked about there's a lot of things that correlate, but they're not related to each other. Like one doesn't cause the other. I think the funniest one that I brought up was that, and these are real correlations, all right? Like ice cream sales every year correlate with shark attacks. When, ice cream sales go up, shark attacks also go up, all right? Here's another funny one. Wi-Fi outages correlate directly with supernatural being sightings. Who would have thought that, right? Who would have thought that your Wi-Fi router is literally keeping away demons, right? But of course, they correlate, but they are completely not related. Just like ice cream sales are not causing, sharks to attack humans because sharks like people that eat ice cream or something like that. It's simply because it's summertime. More people are eating ice cream when more people are swimming in the ocean. It doesn't mean that sharks, kill people that eat ice cream, all right? Pool drownings always go up when nuclear energy generation also increases. Does that mean that nuclear power plants are drowning people in their pools? No, it does not, right? Look, and I think there's a lot of people that are probably against nuclear power, but how many people do you think would argue against nuclear power because it's going to cause you to drown in your pool? Nobody would do that, right? Because they clearly know that correlation does not mean causation in every case, all right? So look, back to DNA. If two animals have similar DNA, does that make it a fact that came from the other animal? It's simply a possibility, but the point is that there's a third lurking variable there. Turn to Genesis chapter number 1, keeping your place in Genesis chapter number 30. There's a third lurking, or there's a second possibility here, all right? There's a second possibility. If you look at Genesis chapter number 1, this is an important foundation we need to lay for the rest of the sermon. Look at verse number 24. Verse number 24, of course we read this last week, but verse 24 of Genesis 1 says, "And God said, let the earth bring forth a living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and the beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good." So look, animals, they look similar. They have similar features. They have legs, they have arms, they have lungs, they have hearts. They have, fur, some of them, right? Even human beings have hair. They have similar features because, here's another reason, it's the same designer. God created the kinds, all right? So evolution simply comes to this wrong conclusion when it comes to correlation. And here's another funny thing about DNA. I don't know when we discovered DNA. Was it 50, 70 years ago, something like that? But the point is that DNA is used by scientists today selectively. They use it when it fits what their narrative, what they want to teach. Because guess what? Each human being on planet Earth that has ever been born has his or her own unique DNA. That DNA deciding whether you're male, female, and then every characteristic about that person. Every single person that has ever lived that has their own unique DNA. Look, a human being has their DNA at conception. Not when they're born, not when they're 2, not when they're 4. At conception, a new DNA is created, which is scientific proof that you have a new person at that point. So if you're an honest scientist, you would have to accept that fact. But of course, science today will just ignore that one. We'll use DNA when it teaches whatever godless philosophy we want it to teach, but we will ignore DNA when it comes to something that fits our political, puzzle piece that we want to fit into. All right, so the first one is obvious, and that was just very quickly, I wanted to get that one out of the way. Couldn't really have a sermon on evolution without that one, because I think that's probably the most common thing that people throw out, like the 99% monkey or whatever, all right? Well, you're also 50% mushroom, so, what can you say? All right, the second one I want to spend some time on. The second one is the second major error with evolution is this thing called microevolution. Microevolution, or what I like to call it, variations between species. Variations between species. Now you can turn to Genesis chapter number 30. Turn to Genesis chapter number 30. See, creation, we talked a little bit about this. We gave you a primer on this last week, but creation has durability. Creation has durability, and creation has flexibility. And man has pretty much always known this from the very beginning. All right, look at Genesis chapter number 30. And before we get into that, remember what I taught you last week about what kinds are. God created animals according to their kind, the beasts of the earth, all the living things according to their kind. And kind, if you remember the taxonomy from life science or biology or whatever class that you took in high school or even middle school, I think they taught this, but kind correlates to the taxonomy of the family of animals, all right? So the bottom of the taxonomy is, the bottom three are family at the top, and then below family you have the genus, and below the genus you have the species. So the species is the lowest. And let me just give you some examples, all right? If you just look at the horse family, since, people in my family like horses, all right? So at the family level, if we're just thinking about equine, all right, or horses, at the family level you have like horses, donkeys, zebras, all right? Basically all these horse-like animals, but guess what? They can all interbreed with each other, all right? So they can, there is, go look it up. You can breed a horse with a zebra, and you get something called a zorse. For real. You get a zorse. It's like this weird-looking thing with it's half zebra, half horse. That's what it looks like. But what's interesting is that God allows there to be, below kinds, He allows there to be some flexibility and some durability there. However, He still protects species in many different ways. And one of the reasons that He does that, and I'm sure there's many examples of this, but a zorse is generally always sterile. So zorses can't just go become their own new species. But my point is, even if a zorse could go off and create more zorses, it would still not be another family. It would not be another kind. All right? So that's one thing you have to remember when it comes to evolutionary terms, is kind equals family. All right? Kind equals family, not species. All right? We create different species of things all the time. All right? And there is nothing wrong with that, but we are not creating kinds. All right? And then when you get down, when you get into, let's stick with the horses, you get to the genus of, the equine, then you've just got the horses. There's no zebras in there. Okay? But then you get down to species, then you've got things like wild Mustang is a species. You got the, domestic quarter horses is a species, right? And there's all these different kinds of species. But in the family level, another one is, donkeys, right? A donkey and a horse can produce offspring called a mule. But a mule is sterile. Mules cannot reproduce, right? And people would create mules all the time because mules had very strong characteristics for being pack animals, and they were strong and docile most times. Donkeys are they're a pain. I don't know if you've ever had a donkey, but you don't want a donkey, all right? Donkeys are really good at protecting animals. A lot of people will get donkeys to protect sheep because donkeys are just ornery. So they would breed a horse with a donkey. You would get this strong, docile animal, and that would be a good, it's a pack mule, right? That's what they were for. But they couldn't reproduce. All right, go to Genesis chapter number 30. Microevolution. Microevolution, all right? Confusion about micro versus macroevolution is point number 2. Look at Genesis 30, verse number 31. Darwin, he noticed all these different, these canaries and all these different things. It's like, look, Jacob was 4,000 years before Darwin, and he knew this. Look at verse number 31. And he said, what shall I give thee? So this is Jacob debating with Laban. Jacob wants out. He's been there for what? Almost 14 years, 15, almost 20 years probably, whatever it is. And he's like, I just want to go. And he's like, give me my flock. Look at verse number 32. He's like, I'll pass through all the flock today, removing thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle amongst the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. Of any shall be my hire. He's saying, Laban's like, what can I give you that would be fair? And he's like, well, he's been tending these sheep and working for Laban for, almost 2 decades. And he's just like, I want to go off with my family. You tricked me into my first wife. I just want to take my family and my kids and go off. And he's like, I'll just take, he's like, which livestock should be mine? He's like, I'll take the ones with spots and basically I'll take the colored ones, right? I'll take the calicos. Look at verse number 33. So shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come, when it shall come from my hire before thy face. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted from among the goats, and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me. And Laban said, behold, I would it might be according to thy word. So Jacob's just like, hey, I'll take the spotted and speckled and the brown ones. Verse 37, skip down a few verses. Now Jacob does something here. Jacob took him rods of green poplar, and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and he pilled white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had pulled before the flocks in the gutters and the watering troughs when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle, ring straight, speckled, and spotted. So here's the idea here, okay? Now, look, I don't really understand the science of this, and I'm not sure that anybody really does, but basically here's what Jacob did, all right? And let's just read the next couple verses. And Jacob did separate the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the ring-straked and the brown in the flock of Laban, and he put his own flocks by themselves, and put them not unto Laban's cattle. And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in, so the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger were Jacob's. All right, so here's what he did. All right, here's what he did. There was a deal amongst Jacob and Laban that I get all the spotted sheep. Okay, I'm just going to simplify it a little bit. I get all the ones with spots. All right, I always like the ones with colors. They seem to sell better and whatever. But, we had registered sheep, so like the ones with colors really they brought a premium. I don't know why. They just did. All right, so he's like, I'll take the ones with color in them. And then he had some way, I don't know if there was some kind of chemical in the bark of these tree branches. That's my thought, I guess. And what he did was, when all the cattle or all the sheep came together, like his and Laban's, he basically, when he saw that there was striped ones amongst everyone, he put the stuff in, so they all so basically the spotted one's bred. The spotted one's bred, and then it's assumed here that some of Laban's non-spotted sheep gave birth to speckled sheep because of this, because he bred them with his cattle. Okay, I keep saying cattle, with his sheep. Okay, so he's found a way to, basically put these animals in heat. Okay, and when his cattle are there, his sheep are there, he puts them in heat so they breed with all of the animals and they create spotted and speckled sheep, right? Now look, here's another thing. If you breed a white ram with a spotted and speckled sheep, or you may get a spotted and speckled, but there's no guarantee, okay? And I'm going to explain that in just a few minutes too. So he's tilting the odds in his favor. And I think the most important thing is verse 41, where he sees the stronger ones. He sees this, and look, every good rancher, and you talk to Brother Trevor about this, he'll talk to you about this for hours. The man's a scientist on this stuff. But, his cattle were Fitbits, for crying out loud. So this is so he can track the strength and the traits of the animals and how they are doing. But Jacob only wanted these strong ones to breed. And any cattle rancher, any person that is practicing husbandry, that's what they're doing. All right, they only want the strong ones. Strong being could be different traits depending on their goals, whatever those are, whatever their their long-term business plan is. But Jacob is selectively breeding his flock, his cattle. All right, and the feeble ones, of course, every single rancher that's worth anything does this too. When you have a feeble cow or a feeble ewe that just either only has one lamb or she doesn't wean lambs or doesn't have much milk, down the road they go. You don't want them to breed them anymore. They are just going to be replaced with one that is strong for the next year. All right, so Jacob is basically breeding to color and he's breeding to strength. So he wants a lot of strong cattle. Smart man. All right, but the point is 4,000 years before Darwin, this was happening. All right, he was tuning creation. Darwin, in, I don't know, when was he, 1870s or 1880s, he writes up this big thing about these birds, these canaries that he finds. He finds canaries in these islands, and some have shorter beaks because on one island they only have seeds to eat. So they have, the canaries with shorter, stronger beaks. They do well in this area because they have to crack these seeds. And then he finds canaries elsewhere that have to eat bugs and maybe dig into flowers and things, and they have longer beaks. And he's like, I have figured out the theory of evolution because these two animals, it's like Jacob was doing this 4,000 years ago. What are you talking about? And again, Darwin was talking about different species. That's not even different species. It's like the same species with different traits is what he was talking about. It's pitiful, right? But the point is, humans can tune the creation, and humans have basically known this for as long as humans have been documenting human things, all right? I mean, they're supposed to subdue it, and God allows us to do this. I mean, Brother Trevor was talking about milk cows, how milk cows, and you can do this very quickly, by the way. This does not take 1,000 years to do this. Brother Trevor was talking, I'm sure I'm going to misquote this, but he's saying in the last 50 years, 30 years, 20 years, whatever it is, milk cow production has doubled. Why? Oh, it's all the stuff they're pumping them. They're pumping them full of antibiotics. No, they're not doing that. It's just selective breeding. It's just smart breeding. All right? I remember in my time, and I was talking to my wife about this too, she remembers it as well, in the 80s and the 90s, most of you don't remember the introduction of Angus cattle into the United States. But it was a pretty big deal in our part of the country in North Dakota because we had a bunch of cattle ranchers there. And I remember that there was like a lot of pushback because before Angus cattle, there was Hereford cattle. And it was Hereford cattle. I mean, and even a young guy shaking his head. Look, that's what it was for like 50 years before that. It was these brown, and everyone's like, what's a Hereford? It's a brown and white cow with horns usually. You got to cut the horns off the cow, and you have to pull calves like on a regular basis. Most ranchers that raise Hereford cattle, like a lot of them have back problems because it's just so hard to raise these animals. You couldn't have as many if you had to put that much labor into it. You ever dehorn cattle? Like, that'll make a man out of you. Let me tell you what. I mean, it's something that, but anyway, the point is, Angus comes along, and these were cattle that were breeded, I don't know where they came from, in Europe somewhere, I think. Something good came out of Europe, but they came, they were naturally, they had no horns. So you didn't have to dehorn them. And then they had like calves with really low birth weight. This was just part of their, which means what? Is that good? Yes, it's good because they can have calves on their own. And then, of course, they come to America, and then American ranchers grab a hold of this, and they just improve this breed, and now you just have these, America, like, we definitely have the best cattle here. We produce the best beef, hands down, in the world, all right? Now, the point is that people are just improving species all the time, all right? But there's mistakes when you extrapolate that to kind becoming another kind, all right? First of all, there is no evidence of kinds turning into other kinds, or families, if you want to just use the scientific term, turning into other families, all right? And a couple points on the microevolution and like selective breeding. Notice what Jacob did, how he had to put in the speckled and the straight in order to get speckled and the straight. All right, one problem with evolution, a major problem with evolution transferring microevolution to macroevolution, and anyone that's ever been in the industry of raising animals or doing any kind of selective breeding will know this, but you can only select what is already there. There's no new information being created. This is why, otherwise, why would a rancher go and pay $100,000 for one bull? Because he needs what's in that bull. Kind of a way of looking at it is like a Scrabble bag. When you breed two animals together, you have like a Scrabble bag. And we used to call it playing the lottery. Like I used to joke around with some registered sheep guys, and like one registered sheep guy, he had the best ram in this specific breed in the entire country, and he would just talk about it all the time. He'd say, yeah, I won the lottery. Because he won the lottery. Because it's basically a Scrabble bag, and you get to pick 7 letters. But there's 200 letters in the bag. As a matter of fact, there's like thousands of letters. There's thousands of traits, but you have the best odds of picking 7 great letters if you start with, a bag of great letters and a bag of great letters. And then you roll the dice and you see what God turns out. But the point is, you only get what's already there. You get a subset of what's in that Scrabble bag. All right? And I mean, every now and then, we raised sheep that were pulled. They didn't have horns. But every now and then, you would get one with a horn. And why? Because that trait is still, even though it's pretty much been bred out of that breed, it's still floating around in that Scrabble bag. And every now and then, even though it's 1 out of 2,000, every now and then it pops up. All right? So, I mean, if you really cared about that trait, which I didn't really care about that trait, you would get rid of that ewe that came from, or that ram that produced that ewe, right? If you wanted to drive that trait out of that Scrabble bag, all right? That's why we would literally drive all the way across the country or halfway across the country for one ram. Why? Because it had the right bag of letters that we were looking for. And these letters, they don't create themselves. You have to go and purchase the right bag, right? Just to have a chance at winning that lottery, right? Of those traits that you want. And then you just, generation after generation after generation, you just get better and better and better and better by tracking these traits and, seeing the speckled and the spotted and the strong, getting rid of the weak, getting rid of the ones that are just white. And pretty soon you got a bunch of strong, speckled, spotted, livestock. And you can do this very quickly. In 10 years, you can create a great flock if you really pay attention to a lot of this stuff. But look, it's all working. The point is this: it's working within the same kind. The same kind, all right? Because God created the kind, we cannot change the kind. There are no new kinds. All the kinds were created in Genesis. And when it comes down to Noah's Ark and people not believing the story of Noah's Ark, there's only about 1,400 kinds. So when it comes down to it, if all Noah did was take kinds onto the ark, then he had a situation where he had about 6,700 animals on the ark, and that was it. Very, very possible, right? So God's realm is the kinds, but he's given us flexibility below this, all right? And evolutionary biology takes things too far, and they don't understand that what they're talking about is microevolution. And again, Jacob was before Darwin. Darwin was a hack. He didn't think of anything new that people didn't already know. Here, it's one of those things where he writes this paper on these birds, and everyone's just like, oh, wow. Like, that's not something that's new. It's in the Bible. They're simply mistaking microevolution with macro. All right, so I asked ChatGPT to give me an example of macroevolution. And I'm about to get rid of ChatGPT because it's way liberal on stuff like this. Like, I'm going to go start looking into DeepSeek and things outside of like these political AI engines. But I asked it. I figured it can't answer a question that's unanswerable, right? Give me an example of macroevolution. And I didn't say this, but I have in parentheses in my notes, meaning kinds turning into other kinds. So I asked AI this, and here's the answer that it gave me. It said domesticated animals like dogs. They evolved from wolves through selection. I asked, do not miss this. I asked for an example of macroevolution, and it gave me an example of a species to species. Wolves and dogs can breed. Wolves are dogs. Have you seen a wolf? They may not breed because one is in someone's house and one's in the forest, but they can breed. They are this. Look, wolves and dogs are not, they are not only the same kind, they are the same genus, and they are the same species. Or are they, no, they're different species. You might argue that they're different species, okay? But they're the same genus and the same kind. So it's confusing microevolution amongst species with macroevolution. I asked another question. I said, give me an example of a new family. I got more specific. Created through, give me an example of a new family. All right, that's a new kind. I used the scientific word for kind, created through evolution. And you know what it gave me? It gave me all these theoretical things like dinosaurs came from birds. Like, there's no evidence for that. That's from Jurassic Park, the movie. Or movies. How many is there? Jurassic Park 13 or whatever? That's from Hollywood. It's not from any kind of evidence. It's like, oh, we think that this kind of looked like a bird, maybe, or whatever. But think about this for a second. Just think, before I leave number 2 here, just think about this for a second. Just think about wolves and dogs as a macroevolution example that it tried to give me. Think of how many wolves and dogs there are. Wolves evolved into dogs, or dogs into wolves. Which one is, I don't know. But that's what, science is telling us. Think how many wolves and dogs there are. Now think of the jump that would be required. So that's a species to species, wolves to dogs. Think of the jump from wolves to horses. If it took so many years or whatever for wolves to turn into dogs or dogs to turn into wolves, and there's how many wolves and dogs exist now that are dying, that are going in the ground, that are turning into fossils, that are turning into skeletons, whatever, how many more of this half-wolf, half-horse transition should there be? We're talking about hundreds of millions of years, folks. No one will say evolution is fast. Just do the thought experiment for a second. Yet what is there? I mean, evolution is over hundreds of millions, billions of years. They just make up these numbers, so people are just like, it must be true because I can't wrap my head around that. But how many of these transitional species from a wolf into a horse into a different kind must there be? Yet there is no evidence in the fossil record at all for these things. What you will find is you will find microevolution examples, and then you will find these one-offs. Like we found a fish with these back legs things that were probably fins, by the way, and that must be the transition between a whale and a person. It's like, because we found one fossil. How many billions of fossils and billions of transitionary creatures must there have been in order for these jumps across kinds to take place? Yet it just doesn't exist. There's no detail of any of these kind-to-kind transitions because it didn't happen. It's not real. And when you get into hey, give me a family-to-family jump, it's like make-believe garbage. It's Jurassic Park 4, or whenever they came up with the birds theory. Because the birds theory didn't even come up in Jurassic Park 1. Sorry to say I know that. It came up in 2 or 3 or something like that, right? But the point is, they'll just grab some odd fossil and just declare it the missing link, right? You know who Darwin thought the missing link was, by the way? The Aborigines and the Africans. That's who he thought the missing link was. The point is there's no resolution. There's no resolution. And if it took place over billions of years, there would be extremely clear resolution in the fossil record. It just doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist because God created the kinds, and he does not let us jump across kind. There's lots of, and look, there's a reason that God allows, variation of species. I hate to even say microevolution, but the reason God allows it is for durability of the creation, and then also for us. For us, so we can subdue the creation, so we can make a living, so we can provide food for the earth, so we can replenish the earth and have children and feed those children and have success in this world using the creation. All right? The third major mistake. So the first major mistake is correlation, assuming correlation equals causation with DNA. The second major mistake is confusing microevolution with macroevolution, which there is zero evidence for. And the reason there's zero evidence for it is because it doesn't exist, all right? The third major mistake is over-extrapolation. And this is a huge mistake that is common not just across evolution, but across many modern scientific origin theory. And I'll explain that. So what is extrapolation? I probably should explain this at the beginning. Extrapolation is, it's basically predicting the future based on past performance, right? So if I see that a plant on day 1 grew 2 inches, and on day 2 it grew 4 inches, and on day 3 it grew, so it grows 2 inches every day. On day 1 it's 2 inches tall, on day 2 it's 4 inches tall, on day 3 it's 6 inches tall. I can kind of extrapolate and say that on day 5 it's probably going to be 10 inches tall. That's extrapolation, all right? It's basically predicting the future. The future, which is also important. You're like, well, that's good, right? That's good, right? Yes, I extrapolate things all the time. Trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. But now, trying to predict the past is a little bit different, all right? Humans are, turn to Deuteronomy chapter number 8. Let me just give you a spiritual example of this. But humans are notoriously bad at remembering the past. All right, and I didn't want to give this away in this morning's sermon. As a matter of fact, you could basically say that God's biggest problem in the Old Testament is that people couldn't retain in their knowledge Him and what He wanted them to do. They couldn't retain in their knowledge the things that He literally just did for them. Look at verse number 11. It says, beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God. And again, the condition that the nation of Israel had in their human condition is the same that man has ever had and will always have. Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God in not keeping His commandments and His judgments and His statutes, which I command thee this day. Lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget, there's that word again, the Lord thy God, which has brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. How long would it take for their flocks to multiply, and their silver and gold to multiply, and them to just, eat and be full, and build goodly houses? We're talking about a year or two, right? We're talking about not that big of amount of time, months, years, not even decades. They get lifted up, and they forget who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness wherein there were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not, that He might humble thee, that He might prove thee, to do thee good in the latter end. And I say in my heart, my power and my might of my hand hath gotten me this wealth. He's just saying, you're going to go do well, and you're going to forget all the things that I did for you, taking you out of Egypt, and you're going to say, look what I've done for myself. But God is just warning the children of Israel again and again and again. Don't forget. Don't forget. Look, within days, they forgot the Red Sea. Within days after the Red Sea, they were saying, you bring us out here to kill us? That's where the manna came from. You should have just left us in Egypt. That was after God parted the sea for them. They had already forgotten. So we can't remember the past 2 weeks. We can't remember the past 2 years, and we think we can extrapolate back 200 million years when there isn't even 200 million years? We think there's 200 million years because we forgot one thing already. What? What did we forget? We forgot God. That's why there is 200 million years. Because we've already forgotten God. We can't even remember God's commands He gave us yesterday. And we think we can extrapolate back 200 million years, which you have to forget God in general to even believe that. The point is, you see how it's not really the same as predicting how tall a plant is going to be in one day? It's not really the same. Evolutionary theory itself is evidence of forgetting God, is what it is. All of these things, the origin of the universe, the age of the universe, and evolutionary theory, they are all making the same mistake. They're making the mistake of what we see now, right now, at this moment, and they're extrapolating it backwards to make all these godless conclusions. Look, the universe is expanding. They look at the universe, they look out. It's expanding. You can see it. You can measure it. Like, it's expanding. So it must have come from a single point. You see how we have a backwards extrapolation problem here? It must have come from this. You wonder, how could somebody have even thought of something so stupid as all the matter in the universe being smashed into a tiny pinhead microscopic dot and then exploding? Like, how could anyone, the reason is because they look at it expanding, and they're like, it must have been a dot. But what? It's over extrapolation. It's the exact same thing with evolution. They look and they see a canary with a little beak, and then a canary with a long beak, and they think we must have all come from mushrooms. I mean, you think that's silly, but that's exactly what's happening. They're seeing species adjust and look similar across the world and across different environments. They're seeing that man can actually change species to a degree, and they're saying they over extrapolate that backwards, and they're like, we all came from the single point. It's a massive error. It's very foolish, especially from my perspective, my worldview, where I actually have to work in a world where things need to work. But you see, it's all the same mistake. And then they just point to some species they're guessing is the missing link, or they point to some obscure fossil or whatever. They're just extrapolating things too far. It's over extrapolation, and it's all the same mistake. Creation has resiliency. God allows us to have some control over creation so we can subdue it, so we can make a living, so we can survive, so we can eat, so we can feed the world, right? So the three main mistakes with evolution, let me just wrap up here so we can get to the barbecue. Correlation is not causation with DNA, right? Mistaking microevolution with macroevolution, and then over extrapolation. Just because we see micro, macro must be true. Wrong. You over extrapolated into error. But guess what? Forget God, and that's what this leads you to. There's many other problems with evolution that I haven't mentioned here. People have done very complete disprovals of it just using mathematics, just using mutations and how long it takes for mutations. And they even give, the evolutionary biologists the fact that even if mutations were good, which they're not, even if mutations were all good, there's just not enough time for all the mutations that you need to happen to turn all these things into all these things. You just can't get there, even with billions of years. Thermodynamics, with evolution, second law of thermodynamics, I love it, but things are getting more and more disorderly. And that works everywhere that you see. That works spiritually, it works physically. I preached a whole sermon on that. That shows you that, the Scrabble bag is the second law of thermodynamics. You're not just getting new information every time two animals or anything in creation breeds, all right? modern evolutionary biology, look, it just has so many things that it literally has, and this is just, I'll end it here. There's so many things about it where there's literally just no answer. There's just no answer. Like, where did life come from? No answer. How about, when has an explosion ever created something more orderly? I mean, the kids can understand this. Kids, how about we strap a bunch of dynamite to your dad's car and we just blow up your dad's car like 80 million times? And how many people think that we will get a nicer car in one of those explosions? It's a ridiculous thought. How about this one? All the things were in one single point, right? And then it exploded, but where did the matter come from in the first place? How about the creation of matter? No answer. Life, no answer. How does an explosion keep order? No answer. See, this stuff drives me crazy because I live in a place called the real world. And all of you go, and you men, you go out and you work in the real world. And I've worked in a lot of real world situations where we're building real things and we're operating real things. And let me tell you a situation that I deal with on almost a weekly, sometimes daily basis, where somebody has a new idea. See, new ideas in the real world would not survive this kind of ridiculousness. Because if I went into a power plant and I said, hey, which is a real situation, by the way, that the world depends on. And I went into a power plant and I say, hey, I have a new way. I have a new idea on how to operate this turbine. And all the people at the power plant and the people at the company were just like, well, that sounds great. Tell us about it. It's a new way. It's a different way than we usually do it. You know, we have all these standards and these procedures. We're going to take all those. We're going to put them aside. I got a new way. And they're like, well, will it work? And I'm like, I have no idea. They're like, is it safe? No idea. What's the cost? No idea. Guess what? I live in a world and you live in a world where at the first no idea, you're done. Yet people listen to this garbage. They write books on it. And so many of the basic questions are just, I don't know. There's no answer. Look, the real world, and thank God that God is not an author of confusion. Because this is just a lot of confusion. It's a lot of no answers. And thank God that the real world could not function in the world that these scientists function in today. Thank God for that. So tonight, in celebration of, just dismissing the theory of evolution and dismissing, this false correlation equaling causation, dismissing microevolution as macroevolution, and just dismissing all of these basic things that forget God, and that's how you got to this basic confusion. We are having Black Angus mushroom and Swiss burgers tonight for our barbecue. All right, let's bow our heads and have a word of prayer.